When you think of public housing, this may be what comes to mind. But in the tropical city-state of Singapore, it's a surprisingly different picture. Public housing on this unique island nation is a point of civic and personal pride, and planning for it starts early.
From the second date onwards, we started talking about pretty serious things like housing.
I just asked her, hey, do you want to just look at BTO flats now?
In Singapore lingo, that actually is akin to a marriage proposal when you actually say very seriously, let's apply for housing together.
Through family-oriented incentives, restrictions, and purpose-built housing, Singapore has nurtured a home ownership rate of around 90%, a staggeringly high figure among wealthy nations. But as rising prices and resale profits impact younger buyers, could this unique social contract be starting to change?
Public housing in Singapore is unlike public housing elsewhere. It doesn't just provide for residual population that who cannot afford their own housing. It in fact provides universally, practically, for the entire Singapore population.
Nearly 4 in 5 Singapore residents basically live in a HDB flat. If you compare it to other equivalent countries, the level of homeownership is nothing compared to what HDB has achieved.
The plan for universal housing began when Singapore achieved self-governance in 1959, at a time when the city was facing a housing crisis, with many people living in crowded, unsanitary slums. In 1960, the government created the Housing and Development Board, or HDB. By 1965, the HDB had built over 50,000 apartments.
Happy home, that's what they're called.
Today, there are more than 1 million HDB flats spread across the country, housing more than 3 million residents.
Because of the long waiting time for new flats, Singapore couples actually think about applying for housing very, very early on, both in age and also early on in their relationship. Some couples talk about applying for housing or just the idea of getting public housing together as early as on the first or second date.
For our friends, most of us would go for HDB flat because it's the most affordable housing available in Singapore.
You can have a good community facility like swimming pool. Our location in the future, there's a mall about 15-minute walk away.
Newer developments are embracing trendy designs and eco-friendly technology, further boosting their appeal among more discerning younger buyers. But certain incentives make it easier for some to own these homes than others.
A large part of HDB subsidies is geared towards the idea of encouraging people to get married and set up a family.
The Singapore government is very pro-family. It insists that the family is the basic institution of society, not the individual. So the public housing favors families.
Currently, in most cases, only singles 35 and above are allowed to buy new HDB flats.
And that's why romantic relationships are being fast-tracked to get priority in the BTO, or build-to-order system, years before units are finished.
So when you first apply, you don't actually have to be married. Couples will actually have to submit a certificate of marriage 3 months within collecting their keys to their new flat.
But that's just the start. After moving in, couples then have to live in their flat for at least 5 years before they can sell, something known as the Minimum Occupation Period, or MOP. These restrictions seem to have led to some curious trends. Since the build-to-order scheme was launched in 2001, there has been an increase in marriage rates among younger Singaporeans. But that's not all.
So over the past few years, we do see more younger couples coming to consult with us when it comes to issues of potential divorces. We also see young couples come to talk to us about prenuptial agreements as well as postnuptial agreements when they are thinking of going ahead with a divorce but are not ready to pull the trigger yet.
Because pulling that trigger comes with some major considerations.
In the unfortunate scenario where there has been a breakdown in the marriage and parties get a divorce, the flat is, of course, the key asset that we have to consider. If this divorce takes place before the fulfillment of the 5-year minimum occupation period, the flat has to be surrendered back to the HDB. As a policy, I do feel that that has been helpful. We do see couples that may have gotten married a little bit younger, and instead of just exiting a marriage the first time there's an issue, they're almost forced to stay together to work through that.
For some couples, staying together is a price they're willing to pay for the huge financial gains they stand to make.
The Singapore government actually owns the land. It sells the flat on a 99-year lease basis. So locally, buying a 99-year lease is usually addressed as owning the flat. But in fact, one owns the lease and the rights to transfer the lease to another buyer.
This ability for owners to resell their flat has created an anomaly for a publicly subsidized housing system: profit. With high demand for units in desirable, convenient locations, the resale prices of some HDB flats have even topped 1 million Singapore dollars. For that reason, buyers like Sean Tan and his wife view their flat as a financial asset. They purchased it in 2023 for just over 500,000 Singapore dollars.
We see potential in the price soaring in the next few years. The number one reason would be there's actually a train station within 500 meters away from this unit. I actually spent about 140,000 SGD for the renovation, and the plan is to stay in this house for about 4 years to hit the minimum occupation period. I'm hoping to sell the house at a higher price, so somewhere maybe about 750,000 to 800,000 Singapore dollars.
And herein lies the great irony of public housing in Singapore.
The subsidized flat is actually a social welfare good. But because you are allowed to transfer the lease, then it becomes a commodity in the market.
People feel that the HDB system should not be a system for profit making, because at its very core, the idea of the HDB system is to ensure housing affordability and home ownership.
It's created tension between the younger and older generations, between those who bought their HDB flats for a relatively decent price and those who now face affordability issues.
Because of the need of maintaining the price of HDB flats, there is a need to keep the prices high. But at the same time, you have to make sure that the younger generation continues to be able to afford flats.
A bigger profit is made by the people who already have higher income. And so the unintended consequence is that the HDB, instead of being redistributive, had in some sense contributed to increased inequality, which rubs the public the wrong way.
Young couples are very worried about how are they going to afford housing, even public housing that is supposed to be cheaper than the other options.
HDB's position on the purpose of affordable public housing is very clear. It should not be a financial gain to the couple. In certain prime locations, the MOP has actually increased from 5 years to 10 years. And I believe that this is a hedge against that sort of potential speculative use of obtaining a flat.
Singapore's Housing and Development Board declined to comment to Bloomberg. The HDB has said publicly it remains committed to keeping housing accessible and affordable, primarily by subsidizing units for first-time buyers. But with multi-year waiting lists for new flats, some buyers end up turning to the much more expensive resale market. In response, the government has doubled down on another tactic.
One of the main ways in which the government has tried to tackle the pricing issue in Singapore is to really ramp up the supply of flats as well. The government is embarking on a very, very aggressive new building scheme that will see many, many new flats being built in the next few years.
These efforts are mostly tweaks to the system, not major overhauls. That's because the government is trying to ensure a critical balancing act between housing affordability and a store of wealth.
Public housing currently accounts for about 1/5 of Singaporean household assets.
Singaporeans of all ages think that public housing is a good investment that will grow in value over time.
Even with growing concerns around surging demand, limited inventory, and climbing prices, Singapore's unique approach to universal housing has attracted global curiosity, especially when many nations and their citizens are facing major housing challenges.
The Housing Authority is one of the most visited public institutions by heads of states and politicians and urban planners because they always hope to learn some lessons to replicate it in their own environment.
I know of friends who live in US or UK, so most of them either rent a house first because they left their house early and they need to pay rental every time and they can't afford a house at our age.
I would say we're considered quite privileged and lucky to be in Singapore, so we are kind of looking forward to a house that's coming in 2029.